I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today, webinar number 5 on nutritional strategies for better reproductive performance. I appreciate you being here and your attention in this topic. My objective today is not to explain reproduction or reproductive physiology to you or to make you reproduction physiologists. My objective today is to help you understand how reproduction affects what you do every day and how reproduction affects the kilograms of feed that you sell every day. And so if I can accomplish that today, help you understand that, then I will be successful if I can do that. So reproduction is not a simple thing to understand. So without reproduction, there is no production. It sounds pretty simple, but yet it's very profound. If the cows do not reproduce, there's nothing for them to produce. And excellent fertility is the key to open all doors to profitability and many management options. Many people do not understand this and do not realize the magnitude that fertility has on everything that the farmer does and everybody that supports the farmer. Excellent fertility opens many, many different doors for options that are available to them. And the opposite is also true. Poor fertility limits the options that a producer and any of the suppliers might have in working with that producer. So my agenda today is to try and explain that importance of reproduction in overall herd performance to you, help you understand that. But then we're going to look at the realities of Korea and try and put that into perspective using Korean data there and understand how reproduction is going to affect both beef and dairy and their performance, and then look at some standards of performance so that you have some benchmark on which you might be able to evaluate the herds that you work with. But the overall objective for dairy is to sell milk and the amount of milk that's sold per cow per day. So in liters of milk sold every day. The cow calf, then that's pretty straightforward. It's the pounds of beef weaned per cow per year. That's the overall objective. And we talk about finished cattle, then it's the pounds of beef sold per year in the finishing animal. But the finishing beef, there's no reproductive component to that production system. So we're not going to talk anymore about finished beef. But on the beef side, we're only going to talk about the cow calf and the pounds or kilograms of beef weaned per cow per year. So if we look at the individual cow biology here, we're going to focus on, we start with conception here and look at the whole life cycle of the cow. And this is dairy, and it's the same for beef. But, you know, at conception, the calf is inside the cow and grows and then calves and goes through a growing development cycle here, growth stages all the way through to where she then calves again, as you can see right here. She goes through that and calves again. So this just illustrates the calf moving through that process, going from birth up to calving for the first time. And then when she calves the first time, she's going to produce milk. And when she does that there, she calves, produces milk. You can see right here in this graph right here, this is a normal lactation curve for a cow. So she starts low and peaks high, and I'll got an illustration of that here in a second. But then she comes, the milk production decreases, she dries off, goes through the cycle again, illustrated by these arrows going round and round. You know, once she gets through this lactation, she dries off, comes over here, calves again, goes through the cycle. She goes through this cycle many different times, as many times as we can get her through there and still be productive. And the beef cow does the same exact thing, only we don't milk the beef cow. She just produces calf after calf. And those weaned calves then are either go into replacements or are sold for finishing beef. And once that cow is no longer productive, then she's sold. She goes through those cycles and sold here, and the body is then harvested for beef. And the cycle of life continues through there. And so that's the normal biology, the normal biological cycle that goes through every day or every year, if you will. So reproductive efficiency determines how quickly the cow cycles through life. Now that's a very important concept to understand, is that cycle of life is going to go through always. It doesn't change, but the speed at which a cow goes through that cycle of life is determined by reproductive efficiency or fertility. So her fertility determines how fast and how many times she actually goes through that cycle. So for you as nutritionists, so we are in the business of managing the biological process and making a profit from it. So that's what we're all about, is managing that reproductive efficiency, managing the nutrition so that she can go through that biological process, produce milk and meat, and so that all of us might be able to profit from that biological process and feed the world. So again, this is that lactation curve that we were looking at before. And you can see the curve. She calves here, given a little bit of milk. And then as lactation increases right here, we see the lactation curve increase. It reaches a peak here at about 50 to 70 days. It'll peak at its maximum value, and then it starts to decrease, and it'll decrease all the way out here. This shows it out to 400 days, as we have days of milk across the horizontal axis and kilos of milk on the vertical axis. And this curve represents a 305-day milk yield of 12,000 kilograms. So average herd, or average production level, but you can see that it tapers off out here. So why is that important? If we have a 13.3 month calving interval, in other words, the time between calves, so she calves here at one point, calves again at 13.3 months later, that's our calving interval. And based on this production level of 12,000 kilos a year, she's going to give us almost 35 kilograms per day on average through that time period. Now, if we shorten that up, let's say 12 months, then due to better reproductive efficiency, then she's going to average 37 kilos of milk per day. So we can get over 2 kilos more milk per day just through better reproductive efficiency. She's going to give more milk through that productive life cycle there. And we haven't changed anything else other than her fertility here. And then we get her bred back sooner and do so more efficiently. So we can sell more feed then. And the cows do better, they give more milk. And I understand Korea is under a quota system. So, that can make a difference on the number of cows that they have in the herd, or potential of getting more quota if there is that potential, or feeding more to calves or whatever. I mean, it opens all those different options that are available to you or to the farmer that are available to him just due to better fertility or better reproductive efficiency in the herd. Let's talk about beef cattle right now and the distribution of calving and how that affects pounds or kilos of weaned beef every year. And so we look across the bottom of this. Let's look at this graph first. Across the bottom here, we have day 21, day 42, day 63, and day 84. Those represent 21-day windows within the calving season or within the calving period. 21 days is used because that's the average estrus cycle length of a beef cow or dairy cow, cows in general. And so it's 21 days. So we use that 21-day window. And the percentage of, on the vertical axis here, is the percentage of cows that calve within that 21-day window. And within the US system, this is how we manage our beef cows. We have a breeding season. So that could be 3 estrus cycles, which would be 63 days. It could be 4 estrus cycles, which would be 85 days or 84 days. And those represent the length of the breeding cycle and therefore also correspond to the length of the calving window or calving period. In the US system is that the calves are all weaned at a specific time. So it's going to be about 205 days after the first cow calves. And so then they're all weaned independent of age, independent of size. They're all weaned at one point in time. And that's our management system and the way we do it. So obviously, the more cows that you can get calved earlier in the calving window or get pregnant earlier in the breeding window, then the larger the calves will be and the more kilos of body weight you're able to market when they're all weaned. But these red bars then represent those herds that have good reproductive efficiency. So in this particular case, you're going to get 63% of them are going to calve in that first 21-day window. In the second 21-day window, you get a cumulative percentage here of about 87% of those cows will calve. And then within that 63-day window, they're going to be about 96%. There's always going to be a few cows that never calve for whatever reason. There could be a whole lot of different reasons that are never going to calve. They're not going to produce a calf that particular year, but we try and minimize what that is. So the green bars then represent average repro. So we can see here on the average, half the cows will calve in the first 21-day window, and then we get a cumulative here of about 80% going to calve through that second window. You know, you get 86, 87% through that third window, and about 91% through that fourth window. So by 85 days, you've got 91% of all your cows will calve. And, you know, there's a little bit higher percentage because you're not near as intense at getting the cows pregnant during the breeding season. There's a few more cows that don't calve. So that's just the distribution of calving in a beef herd. So let's translate that into kilos of body weight weaned, you know, what you're able to market. And so what I've done here is you look at those same windows. These are cumulative windows here of the breeding or calving period. And I've got average body weight of the weaned calves. So those that calve in that first window, they're going to average about 275 kilos. That's after 205 days after the first one is born. And then you're losing here about 25 kilos in average body weight as they get older, or younger, I'm sorry. They're not as old here, so they're smaller because, again, we're weaning them all at the same time. And so if we look here at the body weight under good repro, and I'm assuming here, assuming here a 50 cow herd size. So noted down here, 50 cow herd size. And I'm then totaling. So I use the percentage over here that calve times the 275 kilo body weight. And I come up here with 8,800 kilograms of body weight being weaned. So I do the same calculation here on day 42 calves, day 63 calves, for a total of 13,000 kilos of body weight that is marketed by the cows under good reproductive efficiency. Now, if we look at the body weight of those under average reproductive efficiency, again, there's fewer calves that calve, or cows that calve during that first 21 days. There's even fewer here, maybe a little bit more, but they're smaller, they're younger, and the same thing down here on these other calves. And your total here is 12,350 kilos of weaned body weight. And if we look at the difference down here that I've got in this box, 575 kilos difference in body weight pounds due to nothing more than reproductive efficiency. Doesn't matter what you feed the cows, doesn't matter what you feed the calves. You've got 2 more calves at the end of the year that you can market under better reproductive efficiency than you do under average reproductive efficiency. And that translates to a lot of money and a lot of profitability for the farmer. And eventually it also means a lot more for you for the pounds of feed that you're able to sell as well. So let's look at the Korean reality then. So this is some data that was given to me from 2019 from the Korean Statistical Information Service. And we're looking at years 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And so it's got beef and dairy on there, but let's look first at the beef fertility. You can see here that it's showing the average fertility rates are running between 70 to 75% that calve every year during that 4-year time periods. To me, that's a very low percentage, and I'm not sure that that's even sustainable at that low of a fertility rate. And I have a hard time believing that it's really that low, which I'll show you some data after 2018 here in a second. But this is the data that was shared with me, and it shows what that fertility rate is. So here I took that same graph distribution that you saw before. So the red representing good reproductive efficiency in a beef cattle herd. The green is average under US conditions. And then the blue is what I modeled to be a 72% fertility rate with a 6-month breeding or calving window during that whole time period there. And so we see that there then the distribution, there's not very many, but a higher percentage than other windows. But that calving is stretched out over a 6-month period of time. And only 72% of the cows calve during that 6-month window. So to me, I have a hard time believing that that's what it is, but that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I modeled here to try and help you understand the effects of reproductive efficiency. So again, this is that same table that you saw before, only this one's got the extended 6-month window. So we've got these weaning weights right here for the good repro and average repro that I showed you before. These are exactly the same as before. And then under this Korean body weight, looking at the distribution that I showed you right here, those dark blue columns right there. Again, a 50 cow herd, looking at the distribution here, the percentage of cows that calve during those windows. And I'm assuming here, this is a very important assumption, that we're going to wean them all at 275 kilos. So we're not going to wean them all at one time. We're going to wean them as they reach full market size as a weaned calf at 275 kilos. So that gives the advantage to the Korean system over the American system, because I'm not weaning on one day and I'm not weaning them at different ages. These are weaned at the same age, same body size all the time. And so here we look at this, we total up the total pounds. You can remember the 13,000 kilos here and the 12,350 kilos for average repro. And then under this Korean fertility of 72% fertility rate, we've got less than 10,000 kilograms of weaned body weight being weaned every year from the from the cows. And part of that is because only 36 cows calve every year. That's 72% of the 50 cows. So you've got 14 cows that never calve during the year. And, you know, so this 3,000 kilos, that represents about 11 calves, is a difference in total pounds weaned due to reproduction alone. Nothing more than reproduction and fertility makes up that difference. So if you can feed 3,000 more kilos of calf every year, that spells a lot in reproductive, or not reproductive, but in nutrition. That's a lot of pounds of feed that you can feed just due to better reproductive efficiency. So let's look at the dairy side of things here. So we got fertility here on the dairy side, and it's even worse than the beef side. And so you look at those, you know, 65 to 62% fertility. I have a hard time believing it's that low, even with dairy cows, because I don't think that's sustainable. Again, if we look at this same milk curve that you've seen before, we look at the different calving intervals, the time periods between calves, and you can see here that, you know, the 35 kilos for this one, 37 kilos for the 12-month calving interval. Well, what happens if we go to a 65% fertility rate, which corresponds to a 19-month calving interval? We can see here that our milk production has dropped 7 kilos a day on average, just due to reproductive efficiency. That's a lot of milk there and represents a lot of feed that could be fed to these cows if they're milking 29.5 kilos versus almost 37 kilos of milk every day. And this is strictly due to reproductive efficiency. So hopefully you're beginning to get the idea of the effect that reproductive efficiency has on everything that you do. So here's some data. This is Q1 of last year, first quarter of last year. Again, from the Korean Statistical Information Service. This is looking at the distribution of dairy cows in Korea. So total of 400,000. Those are less than a year old. These would be your calves, 78,000. The 1 to 2 year old calves, 75,000. And those are over 2 years, which would be your mature milking cows, 246,000 cows. So these are the dairy cows themselves. And so you look at that and I say, well, that's a replacement rate of 30%. Now that's pretty low in my book, in my opinion, but it is what it is. And I can see that happening, especially with fertility rates as low as they are. But that tells me that fertility rates are probably higher than the 65%, depending on what the survival rates of those calves are. And so I think that 65% is low for the dairy cows, but still there's a lot of room for improvement there. So again, here, let's look at the beef cows. Same data source, first quarter of last year. So these are for beef cows. And so we look at the number of females, obviously it's going to be higher than the number of males because we got the cows in here. And we've got those females that are not going to be replacements, but are going to be slaughtered or in there as well. And so we get the total here and we look at that. And if we look at this number, whoops, here, you know, the fertility rate's going to run about 81%. If I take the number of females here and divide that by the replacements here, you know, we've got a higher fertility rate than what's being presented in the previous data on those previous years, looking at 2015 to 2018. So this is, again, looking at total number of calves in 2020 and part year through September of last year, 2021. And so here you've got 1 million calves were produced right here in 2020. And if I look at that and compare that to the number of cows females greater than 2 years of age here in this data, then that tells me that that's an 81% fertility rate. So that's where I came up with the 81%, is putting those two tables together, looking at just the number of calves born compared to the number of cows born. And if we substitute that in for dairy calves, or for the dairy cows, so you take 81% of the 250,000, you get 200,000 calves per year that are born to our dairy cows. So again, there's more calves to feed. The better the fertility rate, the more calves to feed. To me, an 81%, though it's far from optimal, is much better than 65% or even a 75% fertility rate. So I think you're doing much better than what the old data would indicate, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. So a few thumb rules. These are Skidmore thumb rules that I use and I find very robust. So it's an 80-80, 80-150, and 7.5%. These are for dairy. And I'll just mention, I'll define these, and that's all I'm going to do, just to give you a benchmark to give that you can go out and look at and evaluate anybody, anywhere. It has nothing to do with management of fertility, it just benchmarks. So the 80-80 rule then is the percentage of cows bred by 80 days in milk. So my rule of thumb is that 80% of all cows, dairy cows, should be bred by 80 days in milk. So that's first breeding, first insemination, should be done by 80 days in milk. The 80-150 rule, and I put in parentheses 75-150. Some people think 80 is a little bit aggressive. I don't think so. I've seen it happen. I've made it happen. I've done it. But 80% of all cows should get pregnant before 150 days in milk. So that becomes an important parameter there. You can look at, what a percentage of the cows are pregnant before 150 days in milk. And then the last dairy rule of thumb for all year round even calving, 77.5% of all cows and heifers need to get pregnant every month of the year. So that's for even calving all year round. If you want to know how many need to get pregnant every month, it's 7.5% of all cows and heifers need to get pregnant every month. So if we look at beef, these are those percentages that I showed you before in those red columns. So you've got 63% need to be bred in the first 21 days, 87% bred by the end of 42 days, and 96 need to be pregnant within that first 63 days in the breeding window, and corresponding calving window as well. So they'll all calve. So there's always a few that are not going to get pregnant no matter what you do, and we try and minimize that. But that would be good recommendations on the beef side, something for you to look at and to follow. So I just want to once more emphasize the kilograms of feed that you are able to sell every year has everything to do with reproduction, more than any other factor on the farm. So reproductive efficiency, yes, it does affect your job. It affects everything that happens on the farm, and the kilograms of feed that you're able to sell. So just a point of wisdom here: to reap great changes, you must focus on the little things you do often. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me, or if there's anything that's not very well understood. And I appreciate your attention this day, and thanks for coming and being here. Thank you.